Good morning, friends, and welcome to a Hasty Podcast. I'm your host, Weston Hasty. I legitimately don't know how to begin podcasts. This is not an area of expertise for me. I don't know. Hello, welcome. This is episode 1. I have decided to put a pair of headphones. Sure, why not? I often wear earbuds. To you, is there a difference between earbuds, headphones? Do you say earphones? I sometimes hear headphones used interchangeably with like earbuds. Someone might put their earbuds in and call them headphones. I think I hear that more often than the other way around, where you might be wearing headphones and call them earbuds. Or I should say, if you have no idea the difference between the two, that was kind of a funny statement. I think there's a difference. Earbuds are the little nubbins that you put into your ears, whereas headphones are the giant monsters that you wear over the top of your ear. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, earphones. Is it only a matter of time? Wouldn't an earphone just be a telephone or a cell phone, right? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe it's only a matter of time before earphone becomes the new thing. There's no indication of that. I have no evidence, but I have said it, and so it shall be. Hello, friends. I'm Weston Hasty. Good morning. It is the Hasty Podcast, a new podcast, episode 1, where today we will be sort of introducing myself and laying out the groundwork for what this podcast is and what you can expect on it. I did run a pilot episode that I called episode 0 that was, for me, a proof of concept of me doing a podcast at all and figuring out, where do I put the podcast? How do I, what's the back end look like for a podcast? Because obviously, right, in terms of actually creating the podcast, I know it's audio format. I know that I have to sit in a chair and speak into a microphone and talk about something. I get the premise of what a podcast is, but not so much how to run one, or what the back end looks like, or how heavy I want to be about editing, or if it's sort of going to be a stream of consciousness style podcast. I was listening back to my episode 0 pilot. It was all over the place, and I fully expect that to continue to be the case as I kind of get used to collecting my thoughts into a coherent form for podcasting, so that maybe I am easier to listen to. I have no idea what this is going to be like, or if it's going to be received well, or who's going to listen to it. This is kind of a make it first and then worry about the rest later type of experiment, and I hope you guys are along for the ride. If there's anyone out there listening, very well, there could be a chance that I will be making episode after episode of these podcasts to no listeners. That is always the possibility as I continue to move forward and learn what it is exactly that I am doing. That being said, you're likely listening to this on Anchor. I am working on getting this over to a number of different platforms. But in the meantime, wherever you might be listening to this from, I do definitely have a URL at anchor.fm/Hasty Podcast. You can leave off the A in a Hasty Podcast, just /Hasty Podcast. And that is where you will be able to find this podcast, as well as links to where you can find it on other platforms as they become available. Eventually, they will also make their way over to the westonhasty.com website. It's a website I host for all the different internet projects that I do. So if you're interested in the podcast, my YouTube channels, my poetry blog, or anything else that I end up doing on the internet, it makes its way over to that website, or at least from that website you can follow links to those other things that I do. And with all of that out of the way, who am I? Where am I? Who am I? Where am I? Where do I come from? Where have I been? Cotton Eye Joe. I don't know. I don't know where that segment was going. This is early in the morning, everybody. It's a weird time. Why the morning, right? It's a weird time to be running this podcast for me. I have a confession to make. One, I wanted to make a podcast as an experiment to see if I could, and it's solo run. One of the reasons I've hesitated to make a podcast in the past is because I wanted to have reliable co-hosts that I knew would, again, not reliable as in I can't trust anybody to co-host. It's more of a fact of, can I get a routine set of co-hosts on to talk to? Can we work our schedules out so that we're free at the same time? Do I need to find one other person, two other people? That sort of situation. And I wasn't sure that I would be able to do that, or even if I myself would be capable of following through. And I shouted this person out in my pilot episode without any other explanation. Recently, I've been speaking to James, the man behind More Than a Podcast, on Twitter. We don't know each other personally. I follow a lot of accounts on Twitter in sort of this attempt to, by the way, follow me on Twitter at Weston Hasty. I follow a lot of people on Twitter in this attempt to sort of broaden my horizons and make connections with basically as many people as possible in the easiest, most non what is the word? All I can think of is the word confrontational, but basically there's no expectation. If I follow someone on Twitter and they turn out to be like horrible, I can unfollow them and forget them. So I don't know. Twitter's funny. I think Twitter's funny. But I've been speaking to James, not about podcasting specifically, but just he seems like a really cool guy on Twitter. The stuff he posts these polls or whatever, and I don't know, it was one of those, just the universe collided, and I've been interacting with him a bit on Twitter, and he runs a podcast, the More Than a Podcast, and I shouted that out in the pilot episode, and I didn't explain why, and the reason I did that and the reason I wanted to was because lately I've been listening to his podcast, and I thought that it ran really well. He hosts this a solo run, it's just him, solo run podcast where he talks about whatever, video games or maybe TV or Netflix shows or little bits of news and that kind of thing that interests him in sort of the nerd sphere a little bit. And it's just him. And I was like, I think maybe to just kind of get my toes into the water and get myself to do it, what if I ran a solo podcast instead of stressing over the situation between getting guests on or finding co-hosts or that kind of thing? What if I just ran a solo podcast? It'll just be my podcast. It doesn't have to be a gimmick of some kind. I have actually run or tried to run 2 podcasts before based around some kind of gimmick where we try to have a very concentrated, focused topic, and we brought on co-hosts, and we tried to do that. And I've had, it hasn't been an altogether horrible experience, but eventually I kind of ran myself out of, I don't know if it was out of interest of doing it, or just eventually you do a thing for so long, people's lives change course, and it's harder to get everybody together to keep working on the same project, especially since it's not our full-time job. There was no money in it whatsoever, and eventually it was getting harder and harder to shoot those podcasts. That said, I do want to do another shout-out to Alex Duquette as well. He's the guy who did the music for this podcast that you heard at the beginning, and at the end you'll hear it as well. He did the music for this podcast, not for specifically this podcast. He's done music for me before on my YouTube, and I just stole some of it. I didn't steal it. I have permission, but I took some of it for the podcast as well and slapped it together on this podcast because I last time on episode 0 I used just some of Anchor's music. Actually, the little tingling, dingling. Little sound effect. It's not like a full-blown song or anything. A little sound effect to sort of introduce and close off the previous episode. I just used some free assets from Anchor, and that works just fine. That's totally fine. But I wanted to make sure that I was capable of using basically all my assets on any platform that I ever deliver to without having to worry about like if there's going to be any conflict between copyright between my content and what Anchor provided me. So the pilot episode, totally fine. The pilot episode was meant to be slapdash and put together just to get a thing out. But yeah, shout out to Alex Duquette. You can find him at YouTube. You can Google or YouTube Alex Duquette, and he should come right up. I believe it's youtube.com/Alex Duquette Music. You can try /Alex Duquette or Alex Duquette Music. You can try either one. I'll also have a link in the description to this episode as we progress forward, and you can go check out his stuff. Good friend of mine. We tried to start a podcast together. The gimmick that we were making was that of basically YouTube tips, of getting started on YouTube. But the gimmick that made our podcast different was that it was YouTube tips from two YouTubers that were not successful on YouTube. Basically, as two nameless nobodies on YouTube, we were sharing our experience using the platform and discussing the things that we learned along the way, mistakes we made. We figured together that we didn't really know of anyone doing that on the YouTube platform because our podcast was going to be on the YouTube platform as well as podcasting platforms. We didn't know anyone on the platform that was doing that, but in our same boat, as being like the entire premise being that we weren't big YouTube stars trying to give people tips on how to do YouTube, because the advice is always the same. Just, be yourself and work hard and you'll get there. It seemed like if you could get advice from big YouTubers, which usually the bigger you got, the less time you'd spend giving tips. If you looked at the biggest YouTube stars, they're not running shows trying to explain to people how to get to where they are. But maybe you could find video or audio evidence of them giving some sort of tip at maybe a convention or an interview, trying to explain how to get big on YouTube. And the advice is always the same no matter who you go to. And it's not that there is any validity to it. It's just that listening to someone who's really big sort of explain that they have no idea how they got to where they are, because a huge part of it is just luck, we both didn't think was helpful. So we wanted to create a more helpful process that would be collaborative between the two of us as the two main co-hosts. And then the idea was to start looking for and bringing on other small YouTubers that had been doing YouTube for some period of time. It was flexible, but we didn't want anyone that had been like, oh, I just started my channel a month ago. Someone who'd been doing YouTube for a while, some period of time, and wasn't huge yet, and bringing on those types of guests to talk about their experience of getting started on YouTube and what they had learned or expected or failed at in the time that they'd been on YouTube. So that was the idea, that we were going to be a podcast of incredibly small YouTube channels discussing what it's like to start and run small YouTube channels. And I still think the idea is a neat one. And the problem with that podcast really was just me. I was in charge of editing together and making that podcast work and putting all the assets together. We recorded, and Alex was going to be in charge of music and stuff. I don't know. I was just spearheading the editing side of things, and honestly, just didn't do it. It was just a time in my life where I guess, apparently, it wasn't a big enough a priority on my plate to find the time to actually edit it. I don't know what I was stuck doing at the time, what I was running around and doing instead, but that podcast never happened. That's kind of a bummer, but shout out to Alex Duquette anyway. Check out his YouTube channel, give him some love or something. He's a good friend of mine. Like I say, I'm using his music for this podcast. I feel a little guilty. I have some music that he made for the podcast we were going to start together, and that's what you heard. I have some of that music, and I feel guilty because I know that music was for that podcast, and I'm like, well, that podcast didn't happen. I guess I'm going to use it for this one. I know he'd be chill with that. But I felt a little bit guilty about that. Anyway, this has been a long-winded introduction, honestly, to a Hasty Podcast. You might be thinking to yourself, if you're still here at this point, you might be thinking to yourself, this man doesn't talk all that fast. What makes this podcast hasty? I'll tell you, in case you didn't pick up on it. My name's Weston Hasty. It's my name. It's a fun name, Weston Hasty. Weston means west of town. Hasty means fast or quickly. So I like to think west of town, quickly. That's what I tell people. That's what the name quite literally means. I don't know. I'm right up there with the likes of Sonic the Hedgehog. Gotta go fast. That's it. It's in the name. Sonic Boom, hasty, fast. What is this podcast about? This is an introduction to me a bit. You've already picked up that I do YouTube. I make Let's Play videos on my main channel called Magic Man Mo. That's a channel. The probably most common question I get on the channel is where the name Magic Man Mo comes from, because it's not my real name. But Mo is just an old nickname from playing baseball in high school, middle school, I guess, was when the nickname started. Mo coming from the phrase slow mo, not because I was particularly slow at baseball or at running or anything along those lines, but rather because at a team breakfast, my coach happened to notice that while the rest of my teammates were shoveling down as many donuts, I don't know, I think we had donuts for breakfast. All I remember are donuts. While my teammates were shoveling down as many as they could, as quickly as they could, so they could have as many as they could, right? The faster you could eat, the more donuts you could eat. There was me eating just one donut at a time. I don't know, I probably ate 2 donuts for breakfast. I don't know, but just slowly, enjoying just the donut and not being awake and just altogether not entirely present. And my coach, as I recall, said it was like watching someone move in slow motion, and I guess that was just funny enough to turn it into a nickname. I became Mo. Slow Mo didn't really stick, but it just became Mo. So that's where that comes from. It's just an old baseball nickname, and Magic and Man come from the fact that, one, I love alliteration. I am a fan for spotting and finding alliteration in literary works, whether it is, I don't know, in some kind of text or in a poem. I love alliteration. So when I was making my username, this is before I was making a channel to upload content to. I just wanted a username on YouTube so that I could like videos. Well, at the time, it wasn't even liking. It was the 1 through 5 stars. But, I wanted to be able to rate YouTube videos and leave comments and that kind of thing, make playlists. And so I needed a username. So I used Mo as my nickname because it wasn't my real name, because at that time I was uncomfortable with putting my real name out on the internet. I mean, that's not uncommon, especially if you're just creating some rando username to use like in a forum or something, right? I wasn't trying to create a brand around my name or anything like that. So I used Mo, and I'm like, I want to do something alliterative. Well, I need some M's. I need some M sounds. I'm like, I'm a man, and I like magic. Magic Man Mo. And magic, I have a history with, as I used to perform little magic shows when I was much younger. Like as a kid, I was really interested in magic, and I learned how to do magic tricks. I had a number of magic props, little prop tricks, as well as learning some card tricks and that kind of thing. And I really enjoyed magic, I just altogether, whether it was doing the tricks and making little performances, or when watching shows or movies that involved magic, or playing video games that involved some kind of magic system. Always been a fan of magic. So Magic Man Mo it became. In hindsight, I realized that it kind of makes it sound like I'm a Magic the Gathering player, which I have played Magic the Gathering, and I do own some Magic the Gathering cards. I don't remember what I think it's what's the vampire? Innistrad or something like that? That's the vampire deck. I think that was kind of the last deck that I really used at the time, and it's been a long time since. So if you were to approach me with a deck of your own Magic cards and are like, let's play some Magic the Gathering, I would whip out this Innistrad deck. I'm not even sure where I have it stored right now, but that's probably what I'd play with. So that's been a couple of like seasons or generations ago in Magic. I'm not even entirely sure what they call their sort of series, because they only ever have like 2 generations of cards out at a time if you're playing Standard, if any of that made sense to you. But I am not a Magic the Gathering YouTuber or even a hardcore player, but I understand that my username almost insinuates that a little bit. But instead, I make Let's Play videos about me playing a number of mostly web games. There's a lot of web games I play from this website called Inca Games. That's earned me quite a bit of popularity, or at least that's what I'm best known for on the channel, as well as a number of other games, the big ones being like maybe Roblox or Minecraft, or what else have I played that's big? Obviously, like Among Us is huge right now. Those are some of the popular ones, but we also play a bunch of other just weird stuff. It was just spooky month. It was just October, so we played a bunch of horror games in October, including like Bendy and the Ink Machine, Canarium, Soma. Couldn't think of the name of that one for a second. And actually on Halloween itself, I played just a slew of itch.io horror games. I can't remember the names to all of them. I have like a list of them somewhere. But yeah, we did a bunch of spooky games, and now that it's November, I have to figure out what's going to be on my itinerary for what we're going to be playing on that channel. I also run a mobile gaming channel, Magic Man Mo Mobile, which is basically the exact same concept, but all mobile games, all phone games. I also stream to the regular Magic Man Mode channel. I'm also a streamer, so YouTuber streamer situation. I'm also on Twitch at twitch.tv/MagicManMo, but I don't do the Twitch thing nearly as much as the YouTube. I actually do almost the entirety of my streaming to YouTube. It's where I have the bigger audience. It's where people expect me to be. So those are my kind of 2 babies at the moment when it comes to YouTube content. I also have a Weston Hasty YouTube channel that is currently... oh my. I have an alarm going off. It's okay. But I have that channel where I was doing some sort of like vlogging situation. It was sort of an exercise vlog. The entire premise behind that channel was to basically force myself to run and exercise. And if I created video documentation of myself doing it, I thought maybe I would be more invested in making sure that I didn't stop doing it, so that I could create a routine. And that worked for a good long time. I did that for like a year or something like that. But I did eventually drop off, and I haven't uploaded that channel in a while, and I did stop running. It's been rough, man. It's been rough, man. But that channel I still have. And they're little micro vlogs. They're like videos that are like a minute long or something like that. They're really short. They're micro vlogs. I plan on doing something else with that channel eventually. I would like to do something education based. Think in terms of like a Tom Scott Vsauce combo, where it's Vsauce in its weird random absurdity, but Tom Scott in its delivery. If that makes sense. If you're familiar with those 2 YouTubers. If you're not, you can check them out, and you might be able to get the vibe of what I want to go for. I also have... What else do I have? I have a Twitch Hive channel. I call it Twitch Hive. It's a Twitch archive, but it's just my Twitch stuff. And not even everything's up there, so that's nothing. So that's kind of my YouTube sphere right now. I also write poetry to a poetry blog that I run at hastilymadedecision.com. It's a WordPress website, basically, that I decided to start one day out of the blue and hastily put it together. Obviously, again, I'm playing on my name. I like to just use the word hasty. Hasty is a good word, and it's my name, so I have a right to use it. So there you go. So Hastily Made Decision is just this quickly thrown together poetry blog that I made to get myself to try to write more frequently. And it worked for a while, and every now and again I go in these ruts and phases where I stop writing anything altogether. It's mostly haiku and senryu. Actually, it's mostly senryu, but most people don't know what a senryu is, so I just tell people it's haiku. Because Senryu in format is pretty much, it looks like haiku. It kind of, in the West, it does that 5-syllable, 7-syllable, 5-syllable structure. The difference between haiku and senryu is typically content. A senryu usually deals with topics around like humanity, whereas haiku deals with topics of nature. So when you read a haiku that is something like "Snow falls on mountain, sun crests over the landscape, winter descends down," or something. I don't know. If it's naturey like that, that's a haiku. Whereas a senryu might have something to do with the nature of people, where it might be something along the lines of "A lie quickly formed, regrets formed quickly still, folly of truth," or something. I don't know. That would be a senryu. Yeah, I tried to make them up on the spot. I probably didn't get it. I probably didn't get the feel down right, but that's kind of the difference between the two. I do a lot of senryu, but I also do a lot of other free form stuff. But I try to keep it all short poetry, because I don't know if it's just I have a short attention span, but I like seeing how much I can say in how little space, basically. So that's what I run over there. I have a project that I'm working on where I want to create a chapbook that I can like distribute. It's a project that I did in college. I had this poetry class that I took where the sort of final project we did is that we had to hand make a chapbook of some of our work that we did throughout the class at the very end. And I kind of enjoyed that process quite a bit, and I want to do kind of more of that, but with a little bit more effort than what I actually put into that class. Because that class, it wasn't an arts and crafts class or whatever like that. The book itself could be pretty slapdash. What was more important was the content and the process, right? But I want to do something like that again for my own work and see if there's a way that I can distribute it to people, like on Etsy or something like that, where like for $5 you can have one of my chapbooks or something like that. And you might be thinking, oh yeah, sure, okay, this is just a money-making scheme for you or whatever. But like the idea is that in my mind, I want to work on these sort of chapbook little crafty projects, and if I can work on them frequently enough, the idea is to eventually create these sort of larger works that are sort of compilations of these smaller chapbook projects. So I thought the chapbook thing would be like a crafty way of basically working on large sections or chapters or arcs or what have you of these larger projects that I'm working on. And then maybe one day, I might release like a full actual book of poetry. I think that'd be really fun. Basically, the chapbook thing is just my way of trying to make sure it stays interesting and fun for me to make, and also offer a way for me to like maybe share that process with other people in a physical form. So I've been looking into that. I haven't actually finished one yet. It's a harder process for me. I often like to move on from a topic, whereas with this chapbook project, I'm currently working on one right now that I'm halfway through writing, I think. I'm roughly halfway through what I think I want to write for this chapbook. But I think I have a problem with staying focused on one theme. I want it to be a very focused theme. And I don't know that I'm doing a good job of that, but that's what I'm working towards trying to do. More information about that in the future, I'm sure. I'll talk more about my writing and that kind of thing. Yes. So, video games, writing books or whatever. We're quickly running out of time, actually. As it turns out, I can go and talk about very little in a very long amount of time. I hope this has been interesting for all of you as we approach the end of what I have prepared for today's episode. If you have questions, leave them below. As of recording this, it is the day after Election Day here in America, so waiting on election results. It's a tense time for a lot of people. It's a tumultuous time. I'm not a political podcast, though. I only mention that now because we did mention it in episode 0. So that's a thing. It's happening, and I probably won't talk about it much. The whole world will probably hear about it long before I talk about it on this silly little podcast. But that's where we're at right now. And it's the reason I bring that up is because I'm not really watching anything interesting or playing anything super interesting. I'll talk about video games next episode, though. I got some games I'd like to talk about, and maybe something else. So that has been a Hasty Podcast, or episode 1, I should say, of a Hasty Podcast. You've been listening to a Hasty Podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it with folks however you can, or like or subscribe to this podcast however you can. Again, I'm a little unsure how podcasts work. I'm still learning and figuring that out. As only a casual podcast listener myself, it's all kind of just a wild west for me. But once again, I want to thank all of you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a terrific morning, and I hope to see you tomorrow. All right, bye.